Today, I am very happy to welcome Aaman Lamba to the Hadean Podcast, author of The Magical Arts, a translation and commentary on the obscure French manuscript and precursor to the Grimorium Verum, Magique, Wellcome manuscript 983. For those of our listeners who are familiar with the Verum, I think you will immediately recognize some startling differences with the contents of this upcoming book. You will also be surprised by the many influences which have been uncovered and the differences in many of the details which shine new light into the origins of this text. Much like Jake Stratton Kent's True Grimoire and Peterson's Secrets of Solomon and his recently published second edition of the Grimorium Verum, Aaman's work here is another desperately needed perspective on this maligned branch of the grimoire tradition. This translation of Magique offers us a new perspective, a window into what came before the Bibliothèque Blue version of this potent book of black magic. It was Jake Stratton Kent's bold innovation on this grimoire which set many of us on the path that we are on today. He made some truly excellent progress in the field, all the while asking his readers to get into the circle themselves and work the system which he devoted his life to. Now we are steadily discovering more and more of the jigsaw, and with the dedication of authors such as Aaman, we can continue to delve deeper into the mysteries and the reconstruction and refinement of this magical art and practice. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome Aaman Lamba to the Hadean Press podcast. Hello, Aaman, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Good to meet you, Matt. Thank you for having me on at the Hadean Podcast. Very happy, excited to be here.
Before we jump into today's subject, could you describe something of yourself and your practice for our listeners?
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Aaman Lamba. I am I'd say an author, magician, occultist, explorer, as well as a computer scientist. So I kind of blend many things together in my journey to discovering whatever is this wonderful world we live in. I have been a researcher of many, fields, scientific and universal and philosophical over the years, right? So really from the physical to the spiritual, and my love for reading has helped kind of really expose me to many fields of study. I've studied French since I was a child, so I'm able to read that as well as a few other languages, and I got onto the field of, kind of what we may call occultism very early. Really, I had somehow a copy of the Book of Ceremonial Magic by A. White when I was a teenager, tried some things out, was pleasantly or rather very surprised at the results. And, I kept that as an interesting oddity, but my discoveries kind of led in many different philosophical directions, from Buddhism to Gnosticism. Uh, it was probably about 10, 15 years ago that I really started delving into what we consider occultism, and really focus on aspects as diverse as angel workings to divination, the tarot, and then really more formally over the last say 5 to 8 years, I've been very focused on a combination of building up my personal, so to speak, practical abilities with regards to astrology, divination, spirit workings, as well as really uncovering or studying the foundational texts that make up this wonderful field. We do live in, as I mentioned, a wonderful time, almost a second renaissance, where we have access to a very vast variety of knowledge, thanks to the very Herculean efforts of the Victorian, the global period, and now the great scholars such as Dr. Skinner, Joseph Peterson, Jake Stratton Kent, and so on. So I've been lucky to have access to that. I've also I'd say researched many of the materia that exist in libraries and documents in various forums to kind of uncover what that field is. So I keep probing. I don't think there is a specific limited structure that I area that I limit myself to, but I am very conversant, I'd say, with the the Solomonic genre, the theosophical and the Gnostic, as well as some more kind of international fields, as one might call them, but really there's no such thing as international in the globalized world. So yeah.
Today, we're going to discuss your upcoming work on a certain precursor manuscript to the Grimorium Verum titled Liat Magique, which is part of the Wellcome library, manuscript 983. I think from now on, we'll call it the magical art. For those in our audience that may not be familiar with the topic, could you begin by maybe giving us a general overview or an idea of what the Grimorium Verum is?
Right, absolutely. So, so the text we are speaking of, right, and I'll go into how this actually further expands into other topics to come. But this is specifically, part of the collection that's called the Wellcome collection, founded by Sir Henry Solomon Wellcome. He was an American pharmaceutical manufacturer, an entrepreneur, and he was a great collector of artifacts, antiquities, books, and he purchased many, collections, libraries, right? This is, kind of manuscript number 983. And as you'll see in the publication, I've been actually able to trace where, most likely Sir Wellcome purchased this, right? And we'll come to that. But fundamentally, this manuscript is, attributed to the really Solomon, right? And, this is not quite literally the great King Solomon, although one might interpret that way. But this belongs in what's called the Solomonic stream, right? So it many authors and philosophers can be brought together. In fact, the cover, the leaf or fly leaf of this manuscript does attribute many of the text to parts of the text to Agrippa, Solomon, Arbatel, who's pretty much a pseudonym for the author of the popular grimoire called the Arbatel, as well as Peter de Urbano, who's the author of the Heptameron, and many other authors, right? So it's really a synthesis. Now, in a general sense, many of these do kind of converge in what's called the Clavicula Salomonis, or the Key of Solomon text. And at least some of them then really went on to become what we know as the true grimoire, or the Grimoire Verum. Now, there is indeed some ambiguity about whether this is distinct from, the Clavicula Salomonis stream, or really is it really the same thing, right? And I go into that in some of my, into the very detailed introduction that I have for this. So the Grimoire Verum, right, is a somewhat distinct, although some might say really part of the stream of the Clavicula Salomonis texts. Now, the MS 983, the text I've written, can almost certainly be identified as a precursor to the Grimoire Verum. The Grimoire Verum, as per Joseph Peterson's studies and Jake Stratton-Kent's own work, is more likely to be 1817 in the most popular version as by Bloquel, but even if you trace it a little further back to 1790, this text may very well be as early as 1719 or 1757, right? And I won't go into the details of that, so I don't bore the listeners. But there are aspects of it that are earlier, and actually this particular text, the other very interesting thing about it is the compiler or transcriber has actually made a great effort to put in the very detailed images of the spirits in great script. There are one or two missing, which will come in a subsequent book of mine. It also has a lot of detail on other aspects of magical working, or as we might say, the magical arts. And that's where this becomes very interesting, right? All of these works really are part of what we may call a Hermetic tradition of magic, right? It draws from Jewish Kabbalah, it draws from Greco-Egyptian workings, and definitely from the Arabic, streams, to really blend it in together and frame the operations in a, liturgical format, right? So this was definitely part of the tradition where they were working very closely with, the clergy or the literate class. combined in a sphere of clerical magic. So the supernatural was commonplace, while it might have been forbidden. Almost all of the practitioners and authors were well versed with these principles, and they would really use these kind of ritual forms in what one might consider unsanctioned methods to summon up spirits to engage with them. They were also very conversant with astrology and the concept of a celestial hierarchy, right? Um, the This manuscript demonstrates a lot of that. I will share more of that as this conversation goes, but I hope that gives you a context of why this is such an important text.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds incredible. So what was it exactly that led you to research this particular precursor document?
Great point. So, in the very, I'd say, cloistered days of the pandemic, and that many of us have survived, and unfortunately, many have suffered tragically. We were in a field of study that, we almost were spending a lot more time online in our, the new, so to speak, virtual covens we have in the digital fora, such as the various Facebook groups and so on. And so this text did come up in some of the discussions. I think most of the our practitioners were very conversant with the Grimoire Verum and Jake Stratton-Kent's excellent work, and Joseph Peterson's and Dr. Skinner's. And so this did come up, and in our conversations, it was identified as being quite interesting. And so I chose to take it on. And as I got deeper into it, I discovered it had very interesting parallels and significance beyond just being a text or a document of workings, right? The title of the book, the L'Art Magique, or the magical art, is very consistent with my own perspective that magic is really the synthesis of art and science. It sits in the middle, in the proto science, or the proto field of thing, where really astronomy and astrology and mathematics were all really one field, right? And it serves in a mechanism of translating the imaginal to the real. It is, of course, in the medieval tradition, with in the period of Maximilian the First and later, which was highly hierarchical, right? So the spirits have very kind of hierarchical titles and so on. But it's also highly influenced by aspects of the French culture, with the influences from what was then the Christian Kabbalah, an offshoot of the Lurianic and other forms of Kabbalah. It has workings from the Psalm annotations of Athanasius Kircher. There are also very interesting references to other French researchers, such as Armandus de Villeneuve and so on, right? Not to mention this very rich borrowing or extraction of the Clavicula Salomonis and the Heptameron. So that's what really drove me to take this on, and I think I'm pretty excited. I think it's a significant step in this field.
You mentioned so many different
Mm.
components that have gone into this manuscript. Does it have a lineage of its own, though? Can it be traced, for instance, say, to any kind of connective tissue with a precursor of, say, the Secrets of Solomon, which Joseph H. Peterson recently translated?
Right. Excellent question. Right. So Joseph H. Peterson and Jake Stratton-Kent have really gone very deep into these texts, right, in their works. I will, really note in the critical second edition of his Joseph H. Peterson's Grimoire Verum from 2023, he has provided a very invaluable tree or lemma of evolution of the Grimoire Verum. He does cite the MS 983 as a closely related manuscript in this text. He notes that it supplies or fills in many of the gaps, right? He also demonstrates the relationship with the variants. So I will defer to that reference. Now, in this context, the Grimoire Verum further, became very critical and so on, right? But if I just focus on this period, the mid 18th century, which is when MS 983 kind of really is there, uh, I think we can almost certainly see a correlation between the British Library's Lansdowne MS 1202, the various versions of the Clavicles of Solomon, specifically the armadillo, right? As well as the what's called a few other Wellcome manuscripts I will come to later in this conversation only because they're part of a subsequent book. And more, very importantly, I want to note the importance of the relying on Peter de Abanos, who's most likely not the author, but the presumed author of the Heptameron, right? So those are definitely mentioned. Another reference I would like to give, and again, we're very fortunate to live in this cornucopia of knowledge, is David Rankine's, excellent Grimoire Encyclopedia, volumes 1 and 2, again published by Hadean Press. It's been an invaluable reference. But fundamentally, yeah, if I come to that, it is the Armadale and the Clavicular Solomon plus the Lansdowne manuscript and one or two other relevant texts.
It's really interesting to hear that you found really solid evidence of those influences on the Grimorium Verum in this text. I think a lot of us may have seen evidence of it or have maybe put some bits together to assume that there were some touchstone points from those original texts, like the Arbitel, etc., and the Heptameron on the Grimorium Verum later on. But to actually know now that you've actually found solid evidence of a single document which contains all of these, or at least aspects of all of these,
Right.
all in one document is really fascinating. The text itself also includes, as you said, sections of the Heptameron by pseudo Peter de Abano. What actual aspects of it are included in the magical art that you've translated?
Sure. So the Heptameron is a pretty diverse text, right? And there are many versions of it. Now, the text in MS 983 is similar to other Heptameron manuscripts. It has a few more of the seals for, the spirits. I think I did identify some of the names. And again, this is existing in Heptameron, but I think we can see some significant French influence in some of the names. But one notable difference I'd like to call out in this manuscript that I haven't really seen in any other manuscript is a specific detailed working to invoke Maimon, the spirit of Saturday, right? So the compiler of this manuscript notes that, just giving a set of tables of spirit names and who's the ruling king. And again, the Heptameron's a lot about directions and regions and elements. Would not work unless he provided a practical example. So he chooses to do this with Maimon. And the reason this is interesting is two of the seven, kings are indeed related to Arabic, potentially as we may call them, the Jinn kings, right? We see Warkan and Maimon corresponding to Barkan and Maimun. And Joseph Peterson has noted this. Dr. Skinner has documented many interesting images of Maimon Rex in his workings in the Clavis Inferni. Now, Maimon, the Jinn king of Saturn, as it were, is attributed to the southern direction. And Maimon may very well have become a Maimon in the Book of Spirits and in Agrippa and in the Goetia. The ritual here, which I have not found in any other manuscript, provides, as it says, the means to make yourself invincible and to strengthen your body like a diamond. Thus, it is explicitly a form of being strong against, forces. Interestingly, it references Constantine, the Emperor Constantine. It must be performed in the hour of Saturn, and specifically in that period between the malefic planets, right? And on the day and hour of Mars. Now, the text does tell the operator not to, desecrate this, and this is a common framing in such manuscripts, but to observe it as did Emperor Constantine. So that's a significant recognition. And it mentions that the pentacle that is explicit pentacle is provided with the seals of Maimon, and the symbols of the malefic, Saturn and Mars, that are showing very clearly the placement and the kind of holy names as they are, Agla, Elohim, and Adonai. This pentacle is to be engraved on iron and worn on the arm, very similar to many Martian, pentacles. And the prayer of invocation is also very interesting. It's one of the few I've found that invokes the three kings, Gaspard, Melchior, and Balthazar, of which Al Cummins has written excellently, and I invoke every year in the Epiphany rite to protect the home. But it conjures Maimon by the planet to which you are subject, ergo Saturn, right? It strengthens the bearer to be impervious to any enemies, and it also interestingly, and this is almost an aside, grants a guardian spirit to the operator enshrined in the pentacle as a sentinel or an inviolable sentinel to the other. So it's a very powerful ritual. And I think that alone, right, apart from the really valuable content of the Heptameron, is great to see. And in theory, and a similar exercise could be performed with each of the kings, framing it that way and constructing a similar pentacle or ritual. So that would be an interesting experiment.
When I was reading it, I couldn't help but think that perhaps there may have been some connection with, for instance, the first spirits of a catalog usually grant the operator the ability to be invisible as opposed to invincible. And I couldn't, I thought perhaps maybe there was some interesting connection there, that maybe this is an alternative to that in a more shamanic sort of context, as in you're making yourself invincible so no harm can occur to you.
Yes.
As opposed
Right.
to being invisible so that the harmful spirits can't see you.
That's interesting. And, I do believe, again, with my, I'd say, personal practice and experiments, that the first spells or techniques one should learn, and probably the most valuable, are indeed invisibility and glamour, right? To be seen when you need to be seen and not to be seen when you shouldn't be or where you don't want to be, right? And once one has those kind of under one's belt, it becomes a little more practical, right? And this also aligns with the dictum of speak when you need to, but be silent in all other aspects. So yeah, that's definitely relevant.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, so I'm keen to try that one out. Yeah. So how well does this document line up then with the work of Jake Stratton Kent and his True Grimoire?
No, this is a great question, right? I mean, we're very, very, unfortunate to have lost Jake too soon. He was a genuine, philosopher, occultist friend, very ready with his knowledge. I consulted him, frequently during the working of this text, and he's been he was kind enough to write the foreword for this, and I'm very, very grateful to him and his really deepest wishes to his family and to Carol for everything, But Jake's work was highly influential and impactful, right? He provides a reference with very detailed comparisons, studies of the various spirit workings and so on, right? This text is somewhat different for a couple of reasons, right? It has the hierarchy of spirits is indeed similar, but the characters are different in some cases. They're more explicit, right? And they also have a wand of hazel, which the characters are provided in MS 983, but not available, as far as I can tell, in other manuscripts of the Grimoire Verum. So the that sets it apart. Now, one significant difference is indeed in the core operation, the invocation of Skirlin, and which involves, as it is described, inscribing the character of Aglasis. Now, I find Aglasis to be a proxy for Skirlin. So one is supposed to note, Aglasis, and in fact, and I don't want to give this away, but in the text, I do identify a clear significance to the character itself, right? And the word reversed that's mentioned next to Aglasis. But in my assessment, Aglasis is really a proxy for Skurlin and is a portal, as it were, through which the other spirits can really manifest themselves, right? So a series of orations, which are again very similar to those in the Clavicula Salomonis, are performed once that character is inscribed, and then finally the license to depart. Something interesting I find here also is the burning of the parchment at the end of the operation. This is consistent with the Grimoire Verum, and I believe this grants spirits more agency than a binding pact, which is typically done and you retain that until your results are obtained. But here you're actually making that very distinct, right? Now, the other aspect that I find, and this is an explicit difference from, the Grimoire Verum, is in the central invocation of what's called the Sanctum Regnum, or the Holy Kingdom. Now, this term appears also in the Grand Grimoire with somewhat of a very different, pact and so on. But the Sanctum Regnum is done again in the Grimoire Verum. There is a preparatory orison or prayer to Astrakios. This is not present in MS 983, right? And it's a very compelling. It's the Astrakios oration I see as a prayer for humility, and it isn't part of this. But the invocation to Skerlin is different in one context. In MS 983, it's different. It's read out as, with the sign of the cross, Helox, Tau, Varaf, Pantheon, Homonorium, Pantagrammaton, and Kasali. You will note that the Tetragrammaton, right, the fourfold name of the Lord, as often rendered as Yahweh, in the Grimoire Verum, is actually replaced with the Pentagrammaton. The Pentagrammaton is often used to refer to Yeshua or Jesus, right? It's hard to give the precise source, but we can find it in the works of Pico della Mirandola in about 1486, and in the rather interesting magical calendar from 1582, of which Adam McLean's done an excellent edition, I think, from 1994. We often also find it in the works of Jacob Boehm, right? The Pentagrammaton is seen as the usage here I see as an intentional choice to place this invocation in a Christian Kabbalist context. There are other examples of this author choosing the Christian Kabbalist context, because in the way the Psalms are referenced and Johannes Reuchlin work is. So I think these are two or three very distinct differences from the Grimoire Verum. And I'm sure a close reading of the works, would probably bring out more, but I was very interested in these distinct variations.
One thing that I noticed was I think you've very succinctly put to bed the idea of the construct of the circle, or how the circle is intended to have been created.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. So if I come to the third part of the book, right? And so following the invocation of Skerlin and inscribing the character of Skerlin and Aglasis reversed, right? You will then kind of invoke the spirit, right, that you're working with. It could be Lucifer, Beelzebub, or Astaroth, the chiefs, or it could be one of the inferior spirits. So this text definitely provides the inferior spirits, right, or the invocations for all three of them. And then a couple of other conjurations, but it notes that we must make the circle, perfume it with amber, musk, and aloes wood, and provides a set of characters to be placed on the four sides of the circle. So very similar to a square around a circle, and placing the candles in the middle. And those characters are indeed provided in this manuscript. And they're quite different from the characters of Skerlin. They are indeed part of, I believe, the characters of the subordinate spirits of, Sirac, but that's, again, it would be hard to describe that on this podcast, but the readers can find that in the book.
And another point that I noticed was the absence of the incense mace.
Right. This is a good point. I did, there are in the Grimoire Verum, right, or in both Jake Stadenkens and Joseph H. Peterson's, the aloes, frankincense, and mace are used, or amber, musk, aloes, and frankincense. But here, it says the perfume or the aromatic perfume should be aloes, wood, amber, musk, and frankincense. And, there is a lot of diversity around, these different perfumes. The incense varies a lot from the Greek magical papyri to the grimoires, right? And we recognize that it, there used to be something called kifi, which was a mixture of 16 ingredients, right? And Plutarch, actually had that. But then it actually goes further. I think things got somewhat simplified. There was galbanum, stacte, and frankincense, and then further. And each of these is really supposed to represent different elements, right? Frankincense typically represents fire, storax represents earth, and so on. And so I do see this difference. And so the aloes, amber, musk, and frankincense seems to be what this, operation is using. And it is not using mace. Yeah, but in general, it does note it's sufficient to burn frankincense in the name of the aforementioned spirits. And there are actually, interestingly, multiple prayers to the perfumes to kind of really consecrate them. We do know from practical experiments and various texts that the spirits are really interested in smell, right, as one of the strong kind of senses they kind of retain. And so the significance of this is interesting, and multiple prayers about, I think, 3 blessings to the perfumes, a separate blessing for smelly odors, and so on.
As you mentioned, this is really a perfect example of a grab bag style of different European grimoires all sort of mushed together. To your knowledge, was this all collected together by a single individual? Or could it have been a collective work similar to Secrets of Solomon?
This is a great question. I do believe this is a single operator's working text, right? It's quite distinctly in a single orthography, a single artistic style. The seals are in a very finely drawn aspect, right? And the synthesis, as I see it in this text, of Solomonic rituals, Christian Kabbalah, astrology, the Heptameron, some very interesting divinations, some what I see as early transcendentalism, as well as the psalm workings and the very distinct angel workings as well, makes this a really comprehensive set of really the magical arts, and it actually demonstrates the diversity of this field in a great way. Almost everything here is eminently practical and workable, not requiring a lot of kind of going and finding a kid goat and going into very deserted, although that might be a good thing to do, but it's definitely a significant text as a foundational text, but also as a practical aggregation or synthesis of many streams of magic and philosophy.
From what I could read, anyway, I noticed that I think the most it asks of the operator is 6 days of fasting and purification. I think that's about the most that it asks.
I haven't right, and of course, to be in a quiet place, not to desecrate these texts in any way, and definitely the operator was French, because of the references or the text to the workings of Arnold, the Villeneuve, and the it actually has a reference to the angel of France, or the superior spirit who governs France. I haven't found that anywhere. Something else that's quite relevant, and it's almost an aside, is a reference to a particular place in Paris. That, again, I don't want to give too much away in the text, but the this might have been a place where a lot of the work was being done, right? So the text in the invocation of the angel Uriel, which does appear, a version of it does appear in the Grimoire Verum, but with a vial of water. This is with olive oil or soot on the nail, right? So it's what's called onymancy, refers to a very specific place, the suburbs of Saint-Germain in Paris, right? Some research, and I must thank our Matt Morash, our good copy editor, to review this. This is a very interesting place, right? It has an Abbey Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which was founded in 558. In the Common Era, it was rebuilt many times. This was a very significant medieval scriptorium. It was a center of learning. The Merovingian tombs were situated here, which were actually desecrated or destroyed during the French Revolution. As I actually, one of the stories about that I mention in my collection of French occult romances. Apparently, the spirits of the kings came back and walked through, that cemetery. But this is indeed a very significant place. And so it clearly tells us that this author was operating and working in France, in Paris. So yes, I do believe it's a single author per se.
You mentioned a few of the really interesting sort of Verum specific mysteries already, but I'd like to bring another one up if that's okay. For the longest time, practitioners of the Verum have been aware of these two very enigmatic spirits mentioned at the very beginning of the text, known as Singambuth and his secretary, Rabinadar. Your translation bears a line of description which our listeners may find particularly interesting. I think it states, the powerful and exalted spirits serve their confederates only when approached by means of the pact, using certain characters described by the will of Singambuth and his secretary Rabinadar, of which one will deny you the intelligence in the key, and the other will tell you afterwards in which way we must make the pact with the spirits. This adds this really significant aspect to our understanding of these two names, as it describes so much more compared to the other manuscripts which we currently have extant. Could you explain anything, or could you cast any further light on these two characters?
Sure. Thank you for that. That's definitely interesting, right? The most workings would say just approach the great chiefs, right? And this does indeed say Lucifer and Beelzebub and Astaroth. But the explicit note that we are getting these workings in the way through Singambuth or Rabindranath now does indicate that there's some significance to that. Now we might assume that these are indeed spirits, right? That we are working with a spirit named Rabindranath and so on. I have come to believe, and it is not in this text, so I'm going to save that for an upcoming text or pamphlet, possibly with Hadean Press, that I have identified Rabindranath as a historical individual. I'm not yet certain about Singambuth, but it might be likely that there is a person. So this can be, it's again speculation that Rabindranath is indeed a historical figure. And I actually did find a reference in Adelung, in his History of Human Folly, as it were, which takes a critical look at various manuscripts of the Key of Solomon and does demonstrate or reference Rabindranath. So I think this reference is significant, but I won't get too bogged down with it. I would still recommend working with the spirits themselves, the whole intent. And this text stresses quite importantly that there are two kinds of spirits, right? The ones who will kind of engage, or the ones who will not, right? And it's the ones who engage that are more easy or effective for us to work with. And those are the ones who look for a pact, or you've got to give or offer something of value. But you've also got to be very careful with them, because they are engaging. You don't, just go with the flow. And so the explicit pact is part of this. And so fundamentally, invoking, starting with Skirlin or Glacis as a portal to invoke your spirit, make your pact, uh, and then really, ask for what you need, dismiss them, and then burn the pact. So you don't really also need to retain that. Is the approach that this text recommends.
So you also mentioned at the beginning this character, Arnald de Villanova, and this character as well was a real person. So it seems that there's a really interesting potential here for the Grimorium Verum being or having included in it this idea of a tutelary spirit involved in it
Right.
from the very outset. Could you cast any further information on that idea?
Absolutely. So Arnold de Villeneuve is a very significant figure in history from the 13th century. He was a physician, a religious reformer, a noted translator of medical texts from Arabic, such as those of Ibn Sina and Galen and so on. He was also reputed, right, as an alchemist. There are some really beautiful portraits or woodcuts of him. Uh, he was the first physician to use alcohol really as an antiseptic. So you can see that. Now he was kind of condemned or criticized because he had apocalyptic views. He said the end of the world would come in I think 1378. That fortunately didn't happen, but that did lead for him to be imprisoned on charges of heresy. He was also kind of seen as a person who had necromantic workings. He was reputedly had a brazen head that would speak, right? His house in Montpellier in France had the lion and the dragon biting its tail, right? So he was known as an astrologer, and many alchemical writings are indeed attributed to him. So the reference here, or the text to Villeneuve is interesting. It actually is somewhat out of place in the Grimoire Verum. It comes somewhere in the middle of book 3, but there's an explicit conjuration that is provided. And again, this is pseudo-epigraphical. It's unlikely that this is from him, but who knows, right? But there's a explicit invocation to receive a spirit that in his name from. So that's definitely interesting.
You already mentioned the archangel Uriel, and to go back to that a little bit, there's an interesting component of your text which features three other spirits alongside Uriel, which are Gesiel, Asiriel, and Asiriel. And collectively, they appear to be cardinal in some way. They're ruling over the directions. These names are quite divergent from what we see later on in the Verum, but they have multiple appearances throughout the larger grimoire tradition. I think you may give some examples of where we can find them. What's the role of these spirits
right
within this text?
So in this section of MS 983, it's quite evident that the scribe was very conversant with more than Solomonic magic, what we may call the Hebraic texts, right? All of these angels, as it were, Uriel, Geziel, Asriel, Gediel, were seen as protective angels. They appear in various amulets dating back to the 1st century, Common Era, and Geriel, Asriel, and Gediel do all appear in the Ars Paulina and the Theurgia Goetia. The best reference would be Dr. Skinner and David Rankine's edition from 2007. But this combination I haven't seen in any other text. The Asriel is noted as, so to speak, the third intelligence and useful to find out when a death of a friend occurs and you want to know who committed the homicide. Geziel is helpful for finding out a thief or arsonist and to get your things back. And Uriel, of course, is to recognize the faults of some people or to know more about somebody who you really want to get close to. And so these are very powerful spirits. Now, in this section, the author actually goes even further, right? Referencing the classic, Hebrew Kabbalistic workings and the Urim and Thurim, which were kind of part of the lights and the perfection, that were attached to the breastplates for the high priest. Interestingly, they were used in divination and cleromancy, which is the casting of lots. And then this actually goes into a completely different direction by referencing the Shem Ham Haphoresh angels, the 72 angels of the name, as it were, that come from Exodus 17 verses 19 to 21, Exodus 14 verses 19 to 21, right? Now, I did find, right, when I was working through these, that there seem to be some, so to speak, what we may call errors in the Hebrew and in the angel naming, right? And it's not unsurprising because many of these practitioners were not native Hebrew speakers. They were kind of inheriting this knowledge or reading it from secondary sources. I was fortunate to have the good counsel and advice and scholarship of Baal Kedmon, the noted linguist and occultist, and he has done some great research and work on this, and I have provided, based on his work, an appendix which has what we may say, the corrected table of angels in Psalms, right? Now, these errors, if I may call it, I really probably shouldn't say errors, but these emendations appear in various places, such as the Goetia of Dr. Rudd and so on, right? So it's important to know the origins of these and where they come from. So that is one of the appendices in this book, right? So how to exactly invoke or work with the 72 angels, some of their powers. Again, this is a very vast field, and it's barely, if any at all, scratching the surface. But this is interestingly, again, there is a correlation between the angels of the Shem Hamfarash and the Athanasius Scourgers, Oedipus Egypticus, and in fact, even further, Abraham Abulafia and Agrippa cites this, right? I was also fortunate, and again, another great reference is the 3-volume modern translation of Agrippa by Eric Purdue. Very, very valuable. I was able to rely on that extensively, for verifying some of this stuff. And so Agrippa has an English transliteration of these names, and that's what most people refer to, and even Rudd does. But as you see, that's not exactly the way the Hebrew text is. And so I think this is quite interesting.
The one thing that I'm really interested in, not only that the 72 angels of the Shem Hamfarash have been included in this document, it's more about the way in which we interpret their offices. So maybe this is just purely in the realm of speculation. We know that many of these names have psalms attributed to them, and we know that they come from Exodus 14, which is the scene in Exodus where Moses parts the Red Sea. How were the officers attributed to each spirit? Do you have anything? Do you have any information on that?
Right. So this is it's a bit hard because a lot of these texts have not been translated or not available. But one of the earliest references is indeed a Hebrew book called the Shimush Tehillim, or the Use of the Psalms. Right. So this was a popular manual for performing, psalm magic, or working with the angels. And this is one of the earliest that has those references. You can kind of go further into this whole field of Kabbalistic psalm workings with the very famous Rabbi Isaac Luria from the 16th century, the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah. So a lot of this does come from those sources, right? Just to take maybe one or two examples, the third angel, again, Agrippa refers to him as, or it as Sitael, but really correctly, that is Sayotel, and I'm probably not doing a great job of pronouncing that, comes from Psalm 91:2. And the verse that's referenced says, I will say of the Lord, who is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. And the office for this angel is indeed protection from adversity, which kind of closely mirrors that verse of the psalm. And so, in many, many cases, for example, even the very next one, the fourth angel, Elemiah, which really should be Alehmehia, comes from Psalm 6, verse 5. Return, O Lord, deliver my soul, save me for thy mercy's sake. This is specifically, the office of the spirit is to protect during travel and to ease mental distress, which again seems to be very close to what that verse says. And I should note these psalm references are really to the Vulgate, the Latin version of the Bible. And I've also provided correction or references. The Psalm 6:5 is correctly the Masoretic Hebrew Bible. That's the more accurate one. There's variations in terms of splitting and combining verses and psalms, but that's a whole different topic. So yeah.
I think it's amazing that we're talking about the Grimorium Verum, but we're also talking about all these other major influences like the Shem Hamfarash. I never imagined that these two documents would share this similar component. So it's really fascinating, and I think this is going to be of interest to not only people who are interested in the Grimorium Verum, but also people who are interested in essentially the entire
Oh, yeah.
spectrum of the grimoire tradition.
Right.
Um,
Right,
very
absolutely. In fact, if I note, the MS 983, and I provided an appendix on this, has a hierarchy of spirits, which is, I think, about 54 spirits, right? But, the Grimoire Verum has a very similar hierarchy with some variations. One of the distinctions, and I think this is probably a misreading, is the Duke under Beelzebub in the Grimoire Verum and in a couple of other documents is separated out as Aglarept and Tarkimak, whereas this is actually most likely just one spirit, Aglarept Tarkimak, right, under whom is the Elogalaftel. And so that's the kind of difference that makes this very interesting. Now, a precursor manuscript that Joseph H. Peterson mentions in the Secret Solomon Destin N91 also has a unified, and I will not even try to pronounce this, but a unified Aglereb Tarkimat Duke. So it's fairly likely that this is the unified spirit, right? If I go further, it seems like the Grand Grimoire, which is almost certainly post these spirits, and of which I did I'd say a definitive translation in 2020, is the Tarkimak is literally dropped, and Aglareb becomes a general, and so that's quite interesting, right? These the hierarchy changes as one goes.
There's an evolution of the
Yeah,
names through history.
yeah,
Yeah, it's always really
right.
interesting to see how they evolve. But yes, that's a really fantastic extra piece of evidence that we can put forth there, that those two spirits, at least at that point in history, were equivalent to they were the same at that
Hmm.
point. Very
Right,
interesting. Um,
right.
you mentioned at the very end of your text some of your own personal practical applications of the magic found within this document. So, how easily do you think that this grimoire could be adapted to modern practice?
I think it's eminently implementable. One doesn't need to go skin a goat or really get a lot of materials. I did indeed have access to some of them as part of my regular magical practice, such as a hazel wand inscribed with the relevant characters. So what I did and this is just one of the experiments, but I used the conjurations of Skirlin and then that of Lucifer with the prayers from this text, right, to invoke the spirit. I had done my exorcism of the room. I had the perfumes. I recited the penitential or the 7 penitential psalms. And once I did the invocation, and this text kind of doesn't quite bring this, but my subsequent working does. One doesn't need to do a lot of testing to see do you have the spirit in physical form, but I verified the presence with an obsidian pendulum on on the character, right, where I'd marked out the 4 characters around the circle, in fact precisely following the text here. I was able to get answers to my questions very precisely and rapidly, and I did also ask for certain other effects that were delivered fairly, directly. Now, I did use mace and frankincense, so interestingly, that worked. I consecrated the water, and once I'd done that, this was done in the hour of Mars on the day of Mars, and with the moon waxing crescent, and Mars was well aspected. So I did my best to follow the conditions as advised, and I think it was fairly effective. So I'd say this is definitely workable.
So, personally, what's the most impressive thing that you think that your translation of this text uncovers, and what do you hope that it will achieve in the larger world of grimoire studies?
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for the time we spent. It's been great to really, spend some time on this. But I believe this text is really a great example of the synthesis of, material from diverse grimoires into a working kind of manual, right? And it brings this together in a very powerful, compelling way. It serves to fill in certain critical gaps in the Grimoire Verum and the general, Grimoire tradition. So I think it's going to be another fundamental reference text to, the occult stream. I hope to continue building on this, and we'll talk more about that, I guess, in the months to come.
And finally, I know that this text is still in the process of being edited, and I know it got so big at one point that we've had to split it in two. Do you have any other projects that you're working on or that you're currently obsessed with at the moment?
Great question. And yeah, indeed, possibly with my ADHD, which I consider both a superpower and a curse, I tend to kind of go off into tangents that are, interesting, and somehow I get value out of those. I had indeed a plan to kind of reference another very related text that actually fills in gaps here, and is a bit broader. And because it became so big, I think we will be releasing it as a separate volume, maybe volume 2 of the Magical Arts, as it were, later this year. Now, I'm continuing to follow that stream, and as I can see, right, the area I'm actually going further on is indeed what we may consider the Neoplatonists, who really were the basis for this work, right? So the Neoplatonists of the late Renaissance, such as Paracelsus, Euclid, Trithemius, were doing some foundational work, right? They were closely influenced or inspired by the Hellenistics, and but it was really a resurrection, a recreation of those concepts, and not really a perennial philosophy as it's called. Now that is an area I think has great field of working, as well as that further influence on the the what we may call theosophical Gnosticism. And so I have a manuscript that's pretty much ready to publish. I have something that's again closely related to something that Jake was working on, and will be his part of his very valuable volume 2 of the Night School that's coming out from Hadean Press. So that's going to come out as well. I actually have about 7, 8 other books in the works, um, which we'll talk more about as they come to life, right? Such as ways of working for solitary magicians, right? While we come together, many of us are very solitary. So we'll talk more about that. And also, I'm really looking forward to another text that's ready for publication, which is called The Song of Oberon, that I've had the good fortune of working with Daniel Harms on. And that's going to be quite exciting, in a different, maybe somewhat related but different field. So looking forward to these texts as they come to life.
And where can our audience find you if they're interested in keeping up with everything that you're up to at the moment?
Sure, thank you. I think the easiest might be my Facebook page, which is aamanlamba.author. If you just search for that on Facebook. I am also on Twitter under the same name, Aaman Lamba. My books are available on Amazon.com. I have 3 books out. The complete illustrated Grand Grimoire, which was kindly accepted by the Library of Congress in their special acquisitions section, is I would say, most valuable and foundational reference to the Grand Grimoire. I have a collection of poems called the Odontiad, which is really interesting, and also the first volume of my great French occult romances, which I highly recommend and I wish more people would read. All these 3 are indeed available on Amazon. I do intend to have a website, a dedicated website soon, but haven't quite got around to it. So
yeah. Yeah, I know that feeling. All right, well, Aaman, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this groundbreaking text. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Looking forward to having this out and continuing the work. So thank you.
That was Aaman Lamba, author of The Magical Arts, soon to be released by Hadean Press. I am honestly blown away by the discoveries Aaman has made in his translation of Liat Magique. It has long been a document many of us have been fascinated by, particularly due to its more complete description of many of the internal components which have, for centuries now, been missing from the Grimorium Verum. I had to really rein in many of the questions, as we decided before the interview that while we wanted to discuss as much as we could to get people interested in the book, we really want to make sure some of the larger revelations were left for the readers to discover themselves. I can't wait for the book to become available so that these conversations can begin. As we mentioned in the interview, the original text Aaman created was well over 500 pages in length, and so it was decided that it best be published in 2 separate volumes. I can't stress enough that what we talked about today only scratches the very surface of the complete contents of this groundbreaking contribution to the field of grimoire studies, and I honestly can't wait for Aaman to return for another interview in the future to talk about Volume 2. Our next podcast will be a particularly special one for Hadean Press, as we will be welcoming to the show a true juggernaut of the magical system of the English Kabbalah, Kath Thompson, who will be with us to discuss the final contribution to her series of works which systematically explore the fascinating subject of gematria and astrological magic. Until then, I wish you wealth, health, and happiness, and I will see you all in the next one.